a few years ago, I was able to use this to requalify for Delta Diamond when I still had Diamond. It was something like $1,200 to fly from Dallas to Madrid via Mexico City round trip in discount business class. So that very quickly put me closer to Delta Diamond at the time.
Hey there, points people. You just heard a clip from Andrew Kunesh. Andrew covers loyalty programs and travel for upgraded points and was previously a senior editor at The Points Guy and CNN Underscored. In this episode, expect to hear about mileage runs and when it makes sense to pay for mileage runs to get airline status. We also talk about some of the sweet spots where you can do this and so much more. And if you are looking to maximize your points so you can travel like Andrew, you can request a free personalized tutorial video for your next points trip at geobreezetravel.com/request. We pick one free tutorial to prepare every week, which you'll find in the free GeoBreeze Travel newsletter. So make sure you open our newsletter every Monday to see if your request was picked and prepared. And now, on with the show. Hey, Andrew. Welcome to the GeoBreeze Travel podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. I know it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, we've been trying to get you on the show for years, and I'm so excited to finally have you here to talk about mileage runs. And for anybody who is new to the game, what is a mileage run and why would somebody want to do one?
Yeah, so in the past, mileage running was more of a way to earn a ton of miles by flying either very cheap fares or very short flights if there was a promotion going on. And unfortunately, that's not really the case anymore, as most airlines, at least stateside and a lot of the European carriers, have moved to revenue-based earning. So how much you spend for a ticket now generally equals how many miles you'll get. But these days, mileage running is more for elite status, especially with some of the foreign airlines. So it's essentially flying as little as possible or as cheaply as possible to get the most elite benefits. For someone like myself that travels a bit for work, but not a ton, it's an easy way to retain a very high level of elite status without spending all my money on flights.
I know a lot of people listen to this podcast because they're like, but I don't want to buy any flights. Why would I buy flights if instead I could just get all the flights for 90% off by using points and miles? Why would somebody want to do a mileage run for that instead of just using points?
Yeah, great question. I mean, a lot of the times, if you're traveling very frequently, you might just not have enough miles to cover every single flight. And a lot of the times for domestic short haul hops, it doesn't always make sense to use miles. And even for certain international flights, especially if you're okay with flying economy, sites like Thrifty Traveler, et cetera, have really good award alerts where I'm seeing consistently, again, post-pandemic, $400 flights to Europe, which went away for a while. But for some 7-8 hour flights, if you're not booking business class, generally it's not a great use of miles. So this is an easy way. Paying for flights is an easy way to save some of your miles and spend a little bit of cash if you can find a good deal.
What are some of the best places where if somebody says, I want to do a mileage run, I want really cheap status by buying a few flights that are pretty cheap and getting the most bang for my buck, where should people look to do this?
Yeah, in terms of finding cheap flights, I mean, there's a ton of good resources out there, and not just solely for mileage running purposes. I read The Flight Deal, Thrifty Traveler, Straight to the Points by our friend Spencer is a really good email newsletter that I've subscribed to since day one. Those are like my three go-tos. Obviously, Going is a pretty iconic one. It used to be Scott's Cheap Flights. I'm subscribed to all of them, but I think generally these days, Thrifty Traveler has the best cash fares by far.
Amazing. Okay, so what airlines tend to be pretty good? If you're like, I want to implement a mileage run strategy to get relatively cheap status with this airline, either because you fly them a lot or you want a status match from them, which airlines work best for this strategy?
It's a good question. There's opportunities across the board with all alliances. I fly a lot of SkyTeam airlines and have kept Delta status for years now. But I think within SkyTeam, you'll find the best deals, namely with Flying Blue and with Virgin Atlantic Flying Club. I'll get into this more later, but they have a really interesting way of counting award flights. It's not necessarily pegged to how many miles you're flying, which opens up some really interesting opportunities for earning a lot of tier points, earning opportunities without actually flying across an ocean.
If people were not optimizing at all, how much do you think it would normally cost to reach some of these tiers versus how much can somebody expect to save if they implemented a pretty good strategy with mileage running instead? So for example, would it normally cost $50,000 and then you can get the same status for about $1,000, $5,000, $10,000? How much savings are we talking about by implementing these strategies well?
Yeah, so it depends obviously by airline, but something like Delta entry level elite status requires 5,000 MQDs. So that's $5,000 spent on Delta flights before you actually, or before any taxes. So that's closer to $7,000, I'd assume, if not more. And that goes all the way up to 28,000 MQDs for top tier diamond status. If status on Delta itself, you can actually do this for almost free if you have a lot of transferable points. If you earn SkyTeam status with Virgin Atlantic, we'll talk about this more later, but you can earn on Virgin Atlantic operated award flights, you earn tier points on those flights. So in theory, you could bring it down to just the cost of taxes and fees on an award ticket. I'd say for the average person, including myself, I'm still spending a few $1,000s a year to keep Delta Platinum status, but it's anywhere near the 18,000 MQDs, or sorry, 15,000 MQDs that would normally require.
Let's go through the chart of what's required, because I definitely don't have the charts memorized of what's required to get each of the different tiers. I don't play with SkyTeam very much at all. I'm a one world person, and then my secondary would be Star Alliance. So I mostly focus on American Airlines, and then in the past, I focused a little bit on United and Air Canada and Singapore Airlines. But for everybody watching on YouTube, can you kind of bring up a chart that shows what are the requirements in order to get status by flying with Delta?
Okay, so here's the current, like obviously there's all the benefits in here as well, but at the top you'll see the MQD requirements for each status tier with Delta. So it's 5,000 for silver, which you can actually earn by opening 2 credit cards, but that's a different topic. 10,000 MQDs for gold, 15,000 for platinum, and 28,000 for diamond. And again, this is based on the cost, the pre-tax cost of Delta airfare. You can also earn MQDs based on a percentage of miles flown when you book and fly on a partner airline. But we'll talk about that more in this presentation.
All right. So if somebody's like, base case, I want to get diamond status with Delta, they're spending $28,000 a year and also having to fly a certain number of segments, or is it just you've spent $28,000 on flights, you're good?
Yeah, nowadays it's, at least with Delta, there's no segment requirement. So if you booked a $40,000 one-way ticket, which I'm sure exists out there somewhere, that could in theory get you all the way to diamond plus some.
Okay. So let's say most people don't want to spend $28,000 to get diamond. What would be the better way to do this strategically with a mileage run?
One easy way with Delta is by leveraging partner tickets. And this has to be booked and flown by the partner. But you'll see here, this is the earning chart for Virgin Atlantic flights when you credit 2 Delta Sky Miles. And at the top, for a business fare, you'll earn 40% at the full fare, or 30% at a discounted business class fare, and 25% for premium economy. Most of us will be booking those discounted fares or premium economy because they're much cheaper than a full fare ticket. But in this example below, a round trip ticket from Heathrow to JFK is £795, which I think is somewhere around $1,000 right now. Because these tickets are earning based on a percentage of miles flown instead of the actual cash you're spending, we would just take the total mileage of the flight, which is roughly 6,900 miles, multiply that by 0.25 in the case of a premium economy ticket, and you would be getting somewhere around 1,700 MQDs. So you're essentially almost doubling the amount of MQDs you're getting despite only spending a certain amount of money. So it's a much more effective way. If you can make the ticket prices work and make your schedule work around these flights, it could save you a lot of money. You need to fly these flights and get find a good deal.
So the strategy here is that you would purchase pretty good cash deal with a partner like Virgin Atlantic. When they ask for your frequent flyer number, you give them your Delta number instead of your Virgin Atlantic number. And then you get a multiplier based off of what class you're flying. What are those multipliers for economy versus premium versus upper class?
Yeah, so it depends on the actual fare code that you're booked into. And again, this will all be listed on Delta's Virgin Atlantic partner page. And so I generally only look for premium economy or discount business class tickets to mileage run, or at least status run with Delta, only because when you get down below premium economy, you start getting into like 10 or 15% MQD rain rates. So I generally find it's worth spending a little extra money to go earn at least 25% or 30% QDs based on miles flown.
All right. So what other combinations of this can people do if they're like, well, I want Delta status, but I'm not going to England, so I don't have much use for buying a discounted business class ticket on Virgin Atlantic. What are some other options?
So it's worth looking at Delta's other partners, and you'll see if you go to this airline partners page on Delta's website, you can see all of their various partners. But what's worth looking at is this core global alliance partners page. Generally, Delta's quote, core global partners earn significantly more MQDs and miles flown as compared to the rest of their global airline partners. A lot of the times, this is airlines like Virgin Atlantic and Air France-KLM that Delta has a part ownership stake in. So you'll see if you're not looking to fly to the UK, you might go to Korean Airlines. You can see here earning MQDs goes all the way up to 60%. Obviously, that's for a first class ticket, which is quite expensive. But you'll see similar earning rates here for a discount business fare, 30%, just like Virgin Atlantic. The same goes for Aeromexico. I've done a couple MQD runs with them in the past. You're still earning 30% in business class tickets. A few years ago, I was able to use this to requalify for Delta Diamond when I still had Diamond. And it was something like $1,200 to fly from Dallas to Madrid by a Mexico City round trip in discount business class. So that very quickly put me closer to Delta Diamond at the time. It's worth just playing around both with this page, finding some interesting airlines, and then just diving into Google Flights and seeing what you can find.
Amazing. Okay, so the strategy here is to go to these different core partners, which for anybody just listening to the audio version of this, you're going to get a lot more if you watch the YouTube version. But Air France, China Eastern, KLM, Korean, what else is there? LATAM, Virgin Atlantic, those are going to be the core partners. So the strategy is to find cheap business class fares with those core airlines or premium economy, jump on those cheap cash deals, give them your Delta frequent flyer number, get accredited to Delta, and you are going to get status so much faster than if you just do this by buying Delta tickets.
Yep. And as an added bonus, especially on those really cheap fares, you're likely going to earn more miles as well. And if you already have status with Delta, you can use those SkyTeam Elite benefits on these flights as well.
And the sweet spot for this is if you can fly really far for as cheap as possible. So you want to maximize for distance per dollar because you are getting your status based off of how far you are physically flying. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So maximize for distance per dollar on some of these different cash tickets. Another good resource for this is Ashley Gets Around. Her newsletter is all cash deals in business class. So if you can fly over to Asia for $700 in business class, you are doing really well with that strategy of distance per dollar. So that's a great strategy for Delta. What other airlines can people do this with?
Yeah, so again, my specialty is mostly with SkyTeam. So I can run through a couple interesting options here with other SkyTeam airlines. This is useful even if you're flying Delta, because a lot of these, well, all of these, they're all in the SkyTeam Alliance, will give you some benefits on Delta. And in some cases, in terms of lounge access, it's actually oddly beneficial to have status with one of these partners.
One airline where a lot of people could use some status because the Delta reciprocal benefits don't always work too well. Just because you have Delta Diamond doesn't mean that's the equivalent of Air France, KLM, Flying Blue, Platinum status, which is the status that you would need in order to book La Première on points, which is very difficult to do. So let's talk about Air France, KLM, Flying Blue next, and how you can do some of these mileage run strategies in order to get status with them, because they are hard to status match to if you are in the US trying to get to that platinum level.
Being based in the US or anywhere, one of the easier SkyTeam programs to earn elite status with. So as a quick refresher here, there's 4 tiers of Air France elite status / KLM elite status that you can earn. However, the ultimate Air France KLM elite status tier, which is called Ultimate, requires a lot of flying on actual Air France KLM. So it's not as easy to mileage run. But here's a quick overview of the 3 tiers that are pretty easy to earn: Silver, Gold, Platinum. And they provide basically all of the benefits you'd expect from a SkyTeam carrier or pretty much any elite status. But the key, at least for me as a Delta flyer, is seeing this Delta Comfort Plus section here. So not so interesting at Silver or Gold. You just get a cash discount on actually purchasing an upgraded seat. But at the Platinum level, you can select that just like a Delta Platinum member would. At booking, you also can access Sky Clubs and other SkyTeam lounges when you're flying, which is a really nice benefit. Delta's own frequent flyers don't get that. So it's nice that this is an option. And everything else is pretty standard. Gold and Platinum, I think, are where the benefits get more interesting as a SkyTeam Elite Plus, which includes lounge access and pre-check bags, Sky Priority, and other nice benefits there. One nice thing about Air France KLM Flying Blue status is that it's earned with these things called XP, which you earn on a flat rate regardless of where you're flying. And this counts for partners as well. So as you can see here, domestic flights within a country earn 2 XP in economy or 6 XP in business, which would also be domestic first class in the US. So a flight from Boston to New York City or New York City to DC would earn 6 XP. There's some intricacies to note here. Flying to and from Canada in business class automatically fall into the medium category. But one nice thing is that because this medium category encompasses all short-haul international flights, if you're flying from, say, Vancouver to Portland or Vancouver to Seattle, you're still going to earn 5 XP on an economy flight or 15 in business. So that's a very easy way to manufacture some of the XP required for these elite tiers. The requirements are pretty straightforward, except when they're not. So the first year is 100 XP for silver, 280 for gold, and 580 for platinum. But once you actually earn that status, it's easier to keep it after that. Silver is the same, but you can basically shave 100 points, 100 XP off of requalifying for gold and a substantial amount for platinum. It only requires 300 ongoing. So if you're able to fly a bunch for a year, you can pretty easily keep this status. And if you're able to swing getting platinum elite for 10 years in a row, you have that status for the rest of your life, which gives you a nice suite of benefits on all SkyTeam carriers and lets you book La Premiere in perpetuity as long as you have the miles. So it's a very nice program if you're just looking for SkyTeam benefits without flying a ton.
So let's go over an example with this. So you would need 580 XP on your first year to get to platinum status. Can you go back one slide? You are earning up to 60 XP per, per mile flown, per dollar spent?
Just per flight. So it's going to be tough the first year, but after that, it gets substantially easier.
Okay, so if you happen to book business class all over the place, so you're booking business class, long haul between the US and Europe and Asia, what is 580 divided by 36 XP per flight? Because
yeah, it's like a little over 16 flights.
Okay, so you need to take 16 one-way long business class flights in a year where you're crediting it to Air France. So that's 16, let's just say 8 round trip over the ocean business class flights that you're paying money for. And then you will reach Air France, KLM Flying Blue, platinum status. That sounds tough.
Yeah, it's definitely tough for the first year. But again, after that, it's about halved. So you can take significantly less. But if you think about it, if you're taking a few of those flights, mixing in some regular, say if you have work travel or you're visiting friends and family in Canada or elsewhere in the US, it can be easier over the course of a year, but still, yeah, that first year is difficult to say the least.
Yeah, because if you're just doing hopping between the US and Canada, premium economy per flight, it's still 58 one-way flights.
Benefit, if you can say that, is if you are taking a lot of connections, each segment earns its own XP. So if you're flying, if you're in New York and you're flying, let's say, JFK to Seattle and then continuing to Seoul, that's in business class, you would at least be kind of doubling up your XP, or not quite doubling, especially if you can get if you can get the connecting flight to be out of the country, you could effectively double your XP depending on how you route it. But it still takes quite a bit of flying that first year.
Okay, so where does mileage run helping? If you're just like, but I still have to take like 50 flights a year, does the mileage run strategy here come into play where you're like, but each of those could be like a couple $100 if you find good flight deals? Yeah,
exactly. If you have a flexible schedule and you can hit those flight deals when you can find a really good one, you can still earn the status for quite cheap as long as you don't mind spending some time on the road.
All right. So there's not really a shortcut as far as time goes for these mileage runs, but there is a shortcut on how much you have to spend in order to do it.
Yes, at least for Flying Blue / Air France-KLM. Okay. I think one more interesting option for a lot of travelers, at least podcast viewers especially, maybe Virgin Atlantic Flying Club, which you can still get similar benefits as Flying Blue, but there's actually here only 2 elite tier, silver and gold, similar benefits, say, to a lot of those. Like, I'd say gold is more similar to Flying Blue, platinum. So elite plus, you get lounge access, etc. That requires 1,000 tier points, whereas the lower silver is 400. But why this is easier is you can actually earn tier points on award tickets. And again, that's per segment. So you can see here 25 tier points per segment in economy, 50 in premium economy, and 100 per upper class segment, which is just their way of saying business class. There's also a shortcut to gold for life. If you earn 7,500 tier points over the course of 10 years and maintain that status for 10 years, then you're, again, have status for life. But what's pretty interesting is if you're able to actually build in connecting tickets on these award flights, which can be to Israel, Lagos, the UAE, and a handful of other destinations in Africa, the Middle East, and India, you'll earn, if you're playing that in economy, that's essentially 200 tier points per flight. So that, like, say you're going from Boston to London and connecting down to Lagos, that's 200 on the way there, 200 on the way back. So in theory, you do that twice and then mix in a handful of Delta domestic flights, which you have to pay for. You would have gold, and then doing that in perpetuity for 10 years would then give you status for life. So it's not terribly difficult, and I'd say this is the more budget-friendly option, especially now that Virgin Atlantic has reduced award costs in some areas with the move to dynamic pricing. So it's very possible to do this without spending quite as much time on the road. But if you are doing Virgin Atlantic status, you give up the way of booking La Premiere and some of the more premium benefits on Delta.
All right. I know that was a lot for everybody listening, so let's review the strategy here. So let's say to get top status, which is gold, you would need 1,000 tier points. If you book upper class flights, that's 100 tier points per segment. So you would need to book 10 of those in a year, which is 5 round trip flights. And the better way to do this would be to book upper class on shorter segments like England and North Africa. Can you just hop back and forth between England and France for a lot of these? Does that count? Does it count for Flying Blue or Virgin Atlantic? If you're just like, hop across London to France 50 times per year, get that many XP if it's 10 XP per flight, does that work?
Yeah, so that would work more easily with Flying Blue because they have more of those shorter routes. With Virgin Atlantic, they only really fly long haul. If you're paying for tickets, that's possible. You just credit SkyTeam short haul flights to Virgin Atlantic. But the sweet spot with Virgin is essentially flying as short as you can with a segment. So something like Boston to the UK, connecting there, and then taking another flight to Lagos where they have a flight is the sweet spot, because then you're earning 200 per, not one-way flight, but like 200 per direction by connecting in London each way. Virgin Atlantic can be a little tricky only because they only have long-haul flights, so they don't do flights within Europe. But if you're able to fly from the US, or they also have plenty of destinations in the Caribbean, and then fly to the UK, connect somewhere else, that's your best bet, at least if you want to do this as quickly as possible. And that could take just two round-trip tickets or round-trip connecting tickets and a couple paid flights that are credited to Virgin Atlantic.
Okay, so the strategy there, find something that connects through England. So like you mentioned, Boston through England into North Africa or the Middle East or somewhere else in Europe where you're going through Virgin Atlantic, because then you're going to get 100 tier points per segment. So you only need 2.5 of those because it's per segment because it connects. Was that the same with Flying Blue where it's per segment? Can you go back a couple slides?
Yeah, so they're also, per segment. So again, if you're doing even domestic, like Chicago to Minneapolis to Seattle, you would earn that per like business, that would be 6 XP per leg.
Does this work for intra-Europe where if you need 580 XP in order to get top status and you're getting 25 XP per medium segment, which is international but under 2,000 miles, can you just take 23 of those segments from like England connecting through France into Italy and then Italy connecting through France back to England and then just do that like 20 times in a year and then get platinum status with Air France? Is that possible?
Yeah, I believe so. That's one way to play it. You would have to pay for those flights because Virgin Atlantic Flying Blue doesn't offer XP on award tickets. But yeah, if you can find a ton of cheap short haul international flights, it's definitely possible.
Or I guess if they don't have first class available, there's always some kind of business class intra-Europe, which is usually they just block the middle seat. Intra-Europe business class is not the same as long-haul business class. But if you're doing this for the purpose of mileage running, 580 required XP divided by 15 XP per segment in business class, you would need 38 segments. If each of your flights, like England through France into Italy, counts as 2, and then you're doing that round trip, that's like 10 round trips in a year. it would be very annoying for an American to have to do that, where they're like, I guess I'm flying England through France into Italy and then back, like 10 of those round trips per year. But if you're an expat living in Europe anyway, and you're like, I really want to book La Premiere and I really like to earn all of these different XP so that I can get that top tier status and get access to those award tickets. I mean, if you're doing 10 round trip in business class between England and Italy via France, I don't know how much that would cost. Maybe like a couple $1,000s if you found some really cheap business class cash tickets.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it depends. And I think it's also, even for people based in the US, if you could find some cheap WestJet or Delta tickets to Canada, you could effectively do the same thing. Living in, if you're on the East Coast, it could be relatively cheap on super off-peak times from New York or Boston to do the same thing.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I forgot that WestJet was also included in this. So for anybody in the Western part, if you can do a connection flight and it's just hopping back and forth between US and Canada over the border multiple times, you're booking this in business class or first class. Domestic first class counts for 25 XP?
I believe, and please double check me on this, but I think that counts as business here.
Yeah, I kind of figured. I was like, Delta domestic first class would count as 25 XP. That would be insane. But yeah, let's still say it's 15 XP per segment. You need 39 of those segments. Let's just say 40. So you're hopping back and forth across the border 20 times in a year. They might think that's a little bit suspicious. But if you're like, I'm doing it for Air France, that'll sound more suspicious. So there's that.
Definitely. Yeah, nothing technically illegal. But.
All right. So that is how you can strategically get to Air France status if you just want to hop back and forth over the Canadian border multiple times with Delta or WestJet or with Virgin Atlantic. Then the strategy is more long haul, where you're connecting through England. Okay, that was a lot. This was a very deep and technical talk. I know a lot of people are like, we want more of the more advanced stuff. I would say this was a more advanced topic with trying to run through all the math. As somebody is trying to get status and do mileage runs to get their SkyTeam status, whether it's with Delta or Air France-KLM Flying Blue or Virgin Atlantic, what would you say is the number one thing to keep in mind?
Yeah, I would say just try and keep the numbers, at least in the terms of Air France-KLM, try and just keep your costs as low as possible, whether that's flying in coach. If you can find a bunch of really good deals, it may be worth flying a little extra. But I think the other thing to keep in mind for both Virgin Atlantic and for Flying Blue is try and build in connections when you can, at least get some extra tier points or XP. Might take a little extra time, but that's likely less than going to and from the airport in extra time. My words of advice there.
It's a different strategy than so many of the other things that people talk about, where with award flights, everyone's like, well, you want to just book over the ocean and then book your positioning flight separately. Or if you can get a direct flight, that would be ideal, where you're not taking a connection. This one's the opposite, where you're like, if you can build in all of those short connections and still have a very cheap cash price, it could be the most inconvenient route in the world. But if you're maximizing for status, that would be the way to go.
Definitely.
It all depends on what you're trying to optimize for. And it's also really important for anybody who's like, I think I'm going to go mileage run now. Do the math on if this is worth it. Because if you're going to spend $2,000 hopping back and forth between Buffalo and Toronto multiple times a year with Delta Airlines, I don't even know if they fly that route. But if they do, are you going to get $2,000 of value out of it as far as upgrade value, check bags, priority boarding, access to La Premiere? Do you even have enough points to book La Premiere? Before you're just like, this sounds like a really cool strategy and I want to try it, make sure you run the math on cost versus benefits and make sure the benefits column is bigger than the cost column.
Yeah, and also just make sure you at least enjoy it a little bit. Like, none of it's worth it. I'd say just pay the couple Comfort Plus upgrades. If you're only flying Delta a handful of times a year and you really like flying, it's probably not worth doing any of this.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's just so much cheaper to just buy the ticket that you want rather than going through all of these shenanigans. If you're a normal person who only takes a couple of vacations per year and you're not a road warrior or anything like that, you do not have to do all of these different mileage runs. None of this is required. Well, this has been a fascinating episode full of so many gems, so much knowledge, and such great advice. Speaking of great advice, can you give a shout out to somebody else on the internet that you would recommend our listeners follow for even more points and miles tips, or just different status tips and ways to level up the travel game?
Yeah, I'd say one person you have to be following is Kyle Olson. Him and I worked together at previously at TVG and previously at CNN as well. He's at Kyle Olson 10 on Instagram, and he also has a French language account. So it's a lot of really interesting tips in English and French coming from him, and also a lot of really cool cabin walkthroughs and other interesting travel content.
And where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, I'm at AKUNESH on Instagram and at Andrew Kunesh on X/Twitter.
Thanks, Andrew, so much for coming onto the show today and sharing this really, really cool strategy, because I don't think too many people talk about how to get status with mileage runs. We focus on points and miles. So many people focus on points and miles, but just goes to show there's so many different ways to play the game of travel.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.